You know, when people picture a romantic getaway in the mountains, they imagine cozy cabins, hot cocoa, and cuddling by the fire. What they don't imagine is dangling off the side of a cliff, trying to decide if your girlfriend's affair with another guy in your hiking group is a bigger problem than the fact that you're about to freeze to death. Let me back up. It all started with Sarah's bright idea. "Let's go on a group hiking trip," she said, her eyes sparkling. "It'll be fun," she promised. To be fair, I agreed because I thought it would score me points as adventurous boyfriend Alex. Turns out, I should have just stuck to binge-watching Survivor because at least there, the betrayals come with tribal councils and dramatic music, not in real life, where your ego is left clinging to scraps of dignity. The first red flag? Eric. Eric was that guy in our group. You know the type, always ready with a smug grin, a wilderness survival tip nobody asked for, and a suspiciously well-maintained beard. From the moment we hit the trail, Sarah seemed just a little too interested in what Eric had to say. "Oh my God, Eric, you know how to start a fire with just flint and steel? That's so impressive," she gushed on day one, while I wrestled with a wet matchbook and a growing sense of inadequacy. "It's nothing," Eric said with a humble shrug that wasn't humble at all. I laughed it off because, really, what else was I supposed to do? Throw a tantrum because my girlfriend thought the human Swiss Army knife was fascinating? No, I told myself I was just being paranoid. Fast forward to day 3, when the snowstorm hit. By then, we were miles away from the trailhead, and the weather turned from picturesque to "we might die here" in less time than it takes Sarah to pick a filter for her Instagram photos. The group decided to find shelter in an abandoned ranger station we'd passed earlier. As we trudged through the snow, I couldn't help but notice how often Sarah and Eric ended up walking side by side, whispering like two conspirators plotting a heist. At one point, I slowed down to tie my boot, and when I caught up, Sarah was laughing at something Eric said, her hand lightly brushing his arm. Her hand. His arm. Look, I'm no Sherlock Holmes, but even I could figure out that something was off. By the time we reached the ranger station, the storm was in full swing. We barely managed to barricade the windows and light a fire before the wind started howling like a horror movie soundtrack. While the rest of us huddled around the fire, Sarah and Eric volunteered to check the supplies. For 20 minutes. In a closet. I didn't think much of it at first. Then I caught a glimpse of them when they came back. Sarah's hair was a little messy, and Eric's smug grin was smugger than usual. "What took you so long?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, we just found some canned food," Sarah said, holding up a dented can of beans like it was some sort of prize. "Right," I said, staring at Eric, who was suddenly very interested in poking the fire with a stick. That's when the doubt started creeping in. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Maybe it was the wind rattling the station, or maybe it was the gnawing feeling in my gut. Either way, I got up to grab some water and heard voices coming from the far corner of the room. Sarah. And Eric. I stayed out of sight, straining to hear. "We can't keep doing this," Eric whispered. "Not now," Sarah hissed back. "We'll talk about it later." "Doing what?" My brain screamed. The words echoed in my head like a bad song stuck on repeat. I knew I couldn't confront them, not yet, anyway. Not when we were still stuck in the wilderness with nothing but snow, canned beans, and a fire that wouldn't last the night. But I made a decision right then and there. If we made it out of this alive, there were going to be some serious conversations. You know how in movies, the hero always has this incredible moment of clarity in a life-or-death situation? Well, let me tell you, clarity is overrated when you're dangling off the side of a cliff. The day started deceptively calm. The storm had passed, leaving behind a blindingly white, powdery hellscape. Everyone seemed eager to leave the ranger station, well, everyone except me, who was still mentally replaying the whispered conversation I'd overheard between Sarah and Eric. "Come on, Alex," Sarah said, giving me her most dazzling smile as we packed up. "The weather's clear now. It'll be fine." "Sure," I muttered, pulling on my gloves. "Fine. Totally fine." Except for the part where my girlfriend might be cheating on me in the middle of a survival situation. Eric, of course, was in his element. He practically radiated smug competence as he led the group through the snow, pointing out landmarks and offering advice like he was auditioning for Bear Grylls, The Next Generation. "Watch your footing on the ridge," he called over his shoulder. "The snow can be unstable." "Oh, really, Eric? Is that a survival tip or a personal threat?" The ridge was where it all went wrong. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, just a narrow path with a steep drop on one side. Nothing a reasonably sane person couldn't handle. But then the snow under my feet gave way. For a moment, time slowed. I felt the ground disappear beneath me, the sickening lurch of my stomach, the rush of cold air. And then I was clinging to the edge of the ridge, my fingers gripping icy rocks as my body dangled over the abyss. "Alex!" Sarah screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos. Eric was the first to react. He dropped to his knees and leaned over the edge, his hand reaching for mine. "Hold on," he shouted. "Oh, trust me, Eric, I'm holding on. Now, let me tell you something about near-death experiences. They don't exactly bring out the best in people." As Eric grabbed my wrist and started pulling, all I could think was, is this guy really saving me, or is he weighing his options? Because let's face it, an accidental slip could solve all his problems, right? "Come on, Alex," he grunted, his face twisted in concentration. "I've got you." Sarah crouched beside him, her hands pressed to her mouth. "Please, Alex, don't let go." "Gee, thanks for the advice." I snapped, my voice strained. I was planning to just take a nap down here. With one final heave, Eric hauled me back onto solid ground. I collapsed in the snow, my chest heaving, my heart pounding in my ears. "You okay?" Sarah asked, her hands fluttering uselessly around me. "Peachy," I said, brushing snow off my jacket. That was exactly the kind of adrenaline rush I needed today. Eric gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Glad you're safe." I looked at him, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Yeah, thanks. You're a real hero." The rest of the hike was tense. Sarah kept glancing at me like she wanted to say something, but every time I caught her eye, she looked away. Eric, meanwhile, was annoyingly chipper, acting like the whole cliff incident hadn't just happened. By the time we made camp that evening, I was ready to explode. Later that night, as everyone else huddled by the fire, I finally cornered Sarah. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. She hesitated, glancing at the others. "Can it wait?" "No," I said, crossing my arms. "It really can't." She sighed and followed me a few paces away from the group. The firelight flickered across her face, making her look almost innocent. "Almost. What's going on with you and Eric?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Alex, it's not what you think." "Really?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because what I think is that my girlfriend and the self-proclaimed wilderness expert have been sneaking around behind my back." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "It's complicated." "Try me," I said, my anger boiling over. "Eric and we were together before you," she admitted quietly. "It ended, but..." "But what?" I demanded. She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've been talking again. I didn't mean for it to happen, Alex. I didn't want to hurt you." I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. The whispers, the looks, the checking the supplies, it all made sense now. "You didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "Sarah, you're doing a terrible job of that." I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. Back at the fire, Eric looked up, his expression unreadable. "We good?" he asked. I laughed bitterly. "Oh, we're great, Eric. Just great." The night after Sarah's confession was brutal. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her and Eric whispering, laughing, or disappearing together. My mind churned with questions I didn't want answers to, and the fact that we were stuck in the middle of nowhere didn't help. Morning didn't bring much clarity, just a blinding headache and a new round of snow flurries. The group decided to press on, hoping to find a clear path back to civilization. Sarah avoided me as we packed up camp, but Eric? He was as chipper as ever, humming to himself like he hadn't just helped detonate my relationship the night before. "You're awfully cheerful for someone trudging through a snowstorm," I muttered as I tightened the straps on my pack. Eric smirked, adjusting his gloves. "Optimism keeps you warm, Alex. You should try it sometime." "Oh, trust me, Eric. If murder weren't so cold-blooded, literally, I might have considered it." The day's hike was slow and grueling. Snow caked our boots, and the wind bit through every layer we wore. Tensions were running high, and the group's patience was wearing thin. By mid-afternoon, we reached a partially frozen river. The ice looked sturdy enough, but none of us wanted to test our luck. "We'll have to go around," Eric announced, pointing to a narrow path along the riverbank. "It's going to take hours," someone groaned. Eric shrugged. "Unless you want to take a swim, this is the safest option." I couldn't resist. "Oh, so now you're all about safety, huh? That's rich." Eric glanced at me, his jaw tightening. "Got something to say, Alex?" "Plenty," I shot back. "But maybe I'll save it for when we're not all freezing to death." Sarah stepped between us, her voice sharp. "Enough, both of you. This isn't the time." "Sure thing, Sarah," I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "Wouldn't want to upset your buddy here." She glared at me, but before she could respond, the group started moving again. As we navigated the treacherous path, I found myself trailing behind, lost in thought. The thing is, I wasn't just angry, I was hurt. Sarah's betrayal felt like a sucker punch, and the fact that Eric was right there, walking in front of me like nothing was wrong, only made it worse. But then I heard something. A crack. At first, I thought it was just the sound of ice breaking along the riverbank. But when I looked up, I saw Eric slip on a patch of loose snow. He flailed for balance, his arms windmilling, and then he was gone, disappearing over the edge of the bank and into the icy water below. "Eric!" Sarah screamed, running toward the edge. The rest of the group froze, unsure of what to do. "Stay back!" I yelled, rushing forward. The last thing we needed was another person falling in. The scene was chaotic. Eric was thrashing in the water, trying to grab onto the jagged ice, but the current was pulling him downstream. "Help him!" Sarah shouted, her eyes wild with panic. I hesitated for half a second, a terrible, petty voice in my head whispering, "Let him handle it. Mr. Survival Expert can figure it out." But then I saw the look on her face, the sheer terror, and I knew I couldn't let him drown. I grabbed a fallen branch from the ground and scrambled to the edge of the riverbank. "Eric!" I shouted, extending the branch toward him. "Grab on." He reached for it, his hands slipping on the frozen surface, but finally, he managed to get a grip. With the help of another hiker, I pulled him back onto solid ground. He collapsed in the snow, coughing and shivering violently. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, dropping to her knees beside him. Eric nodded weakly, his teeth chattering too hard to speak. I stood there, drenched in sweat despite the cold, and couldn't help myself. "You're welcome, by the way." The group quickly set up a fire to warm Eric up, and Sarah stayed glued to his side, fussing over him like a worried mother hen. I kept my distance, watching the two of them with a mix of exhaustion and bitterness. When Eric finally stopped shivering, he looked up at me. "Thanks," he said, his voice hoarse. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to say, "Don't thank me, I'm not sure why I even bothered." But instead, I just nodded. "Don't mention it," I muttered. That night, as the group settled into a tense, uneasy silence, Sarah approached me. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. "Why?" I said, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. So you can explain why you're so desperate to save the guy who wrecked our relationship? She flinched, but didn't back down. Alex, I know I've hurt you. And I know you probably hate me right now. But I need you to understand, it's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. Really? Because what I think is that you and Eric have been sneaking around behind my back, and now I'm the idiot who saved his life. Eric and I aren't together, she said, her voice breaking. Not anymore. Whatever we had, it's over. I swear. Then why didn't you tell me? I demanded. Why keep it a secret? Because I didn't want to lose you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I made a mistake, Alex. A huge mistake. But I didn't want to ruin us. I stared at her, my anger warring with something softer, something I wasn't ready to admit. Sarah, I said finally, my voice heavy with exhaustion. You already did. You know, there's something about spending days freezing your ass off in the wilderness that makes emotions run a little hotter than they probably should. Or maybe it was just me, still fuming over Sarah's half-hearted confession and the fact that I'd just saved Eric's life, Eric, the human snow globe of bad decisions wrapped in smug survival skills. The next morning, the group was quieter than usual as we packed up camp. Even Eric, usually full of annoying advice and bad jokes, barely said a word. Maybe it was the near-death experience, or maybe he could feel the heat of my glare every time I looked his way. Everyone ready? Eric finally asked, his voice raspier than usual. Ready to get out of here, I muttered under my breath, adjusting my pack. Sarah gave me a cautious glance but didn't say anything. Probably for the best. The day's hike was long and grueling, with the snow deeper and the air colder than before. At some point, one of the hikers twisted their ankle, which slowed us down even more. Eric insisted on taking the lead again, despite still looking like he'd gone 3 rounds with an iceberg. Are you sure you're up for this? Someone asked. Eric waved them off. I'm fine. Let's just keep moving. Of course you're fine, I muttered, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Heroes always bounce back quickly. She shot me a sharp look but didn't respond. By late afternoon, the tension reached its breaking point. We stopped to rest near a rocky outcropping, and as the group huddled together to share what little food we had left, Eric pulled Sarah aside. I watched them from a distance, my jaw tightening as they talked in hushed voices. Her hand brushed his arm, and his expression softened in a way that made my stomach turn. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and marched over to them, my boots crunching loudly in the snow. Is this a private conversation, or can anyone join? They both turned to look at me, startled. Sarah's cheeks flushed, and Eric, of course, tried to play it cool. Alex, Sarah started, her voice pleading. This isn't what it looks like. Really? I snapped. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you two are having a cozy little moment while the rest of us are trying to figure out how to survive. Eric raised his hands defensively. Hey, man, calm down. We're just talking. Don't hey, man me, I shot back, my voice rising. I'm done with the sneaking around, the whispers, the excuses. If there's something you need to say, just say it. Sarah looked at Eric, then back at me, her eyes wide and panicked. Alex, please. This isn't the time. Oh, it's exactly the time, I said, my anger boiling over. We're stuck in the middle of nowhere with nothing but snow and lies to keep us warm. So go ahead, Sarah. Lay it all out there. What's really going on between you two? The rest of the group had fallen silent, their eyes darting between us like they were watching the world's most awkward reality show. Alex, stop, Sarah said, her voice breaking. You're making this worse. I'm making this worse? I laughed bitterly. That's rich coming from the woman who's been hiding her feelings for Mr. Survival over here. Hey, Eric interjected, his voice low and warning. Don't drag me into this. Oh, you're already in it, buddy, I snapped. In it up to your neck. The argument escalated quickly, with Sarah trying to defend herself, Eric playing the victim, and me unleashing weeks of frustration and betrayal. At one point, someone in the group tried to step in, but they quickly realized this wasn't their fight and backed off. Finally, Sarah shouted, "Fine. Yes, I had feelings for Eric. Are you happy now?" Her words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. The group went dead silent. Even the wind seemed to stop, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I stared at her, my chest heaving, my anger giving way to a hollow ache. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not happy. Not even close." The rest of the hike was a blur. Nobody said much after that, and the weight of Sarah's confession sat heavy on all of us. I kept my distance, walking at the back of the group, my thoughts a chaotic mess. By the time we reached a sheltered clearing to set up camp for the night, I was emotionally and physically drained. I barely spoke as I set up my tent, avoiding Sarah and Eric like the plague. As I lay in my sleeping bag that night, staring up at the fabric ceiling, one thought kept running through my mind. What the hell was I supposed to do now? The morning after Sarah's confession, I woke up to a biting chill and the realization that no amount of freezing temperatures could match the Cold War happening within our group. Everyone moved in tense silence as we packed up camp. Sarah avoided my gaze, Eric kept his distance, and the rest of the group looked like they'd rather hike straight into an avalanche than deal with the awkwardness hanging over us. I was fine with the quiet. The less I had to hear Eric's smug voice or Sarah's excuses, the better. We set off again, trudging through the snow in single file. The path had narrowed, forcing us into a precarious line along the edge of another ridge. I kept my eyes on the trail, focusing on placing one foot in front of the other, until the silence was broken by Eric's voice. "Watch out for ice up ahead," he called, his tone more serious than usual. I gritted my teeth. "Thanks for the heads up, Captain Obvious." Sarah shot me a warning look, but I ignored her. If Eric wanted to play the hero again, he was welcome to it. The icy patch came sooner than expected. One of the hikers ahead of me slipped, but Eric was quick to catch them, steadying them with one of his classic, self-satisfied grins. "Got you," he said, like he was auditioning for a toothpaste commercial. I rolled my eyes, muttering under my breath. What a guy. Unfortunately, my muttering distracted me just enough to miss my own footing. The world tilted. My foot slid out from under me, and before I knew it, I was on my back, skidding toward the edge of the ridge. My arms flailed, desperately grabbing for something, anything, to stop my fall. "Alex!" Sarah screamed, her voice cutting through the icy air. For the second time in as many days, I found myself dangling off a cliff, clinging to a jagged rock with nothing but open space below me. "Not again," I groaned through gritted teeth. Eric was the first to reach me. Of course, he was. "Hold on," he shouted, dropping to his knees and reaching for my hand. "Déjà vu," I muttered, gripping the rock tighter. "Careful, Eric. If you let me fall, Sarah might never forgive you." "This isn't the time for jokes," he snapped, his face set in determination. "Who's joking?" Despite the bitterness in my voice, I reached for him. He grabbed my wrist and, with a strength I hated to admit he had, hauled me back onto solid ground. As I collapsed in the snow, gasping for breath, Sarah knelt beside me, her hands hovering uselessly. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. I pushed myself up, brushing snow off my jacket. "I'm peachy. Thanks for asking." Eric crouched next to me, his expression unreadable. "You need to be more careful." "Wow, thanks for the life lesson," I snapped. "I'll be sure to remember that the next time the ground tries to kill me." The group pressed on after that, but the tension between us reached a boiling point when we stopped for a break. "All right, that's it," I said, tossing my pack to the ground. "We need to talk." Eric raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Oh, I don't know," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe about how I keep almost dying while you play the hero. Or about how you and Sarah have been sneaking around behind my back. Take your pick." Sarah's face flushed. Alex, please, not here. Yes, here, I shot back. We're miles from anywhere, and I'm not walking another step until we clear the air. The rest of the group exchanged nervous glances, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Eric sighed, stepping forward. Look, Alex, I get that you're upset, but you're making this bigger than it needs to be. Bigger? I said, laughing bitterly. Oh, I'm sorry, Eric. Is my girlfriend's betrayal inconveniencing you? Stop, Sarah said, her voice breaking. Just stop, both of you. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Alex, I'm sorry. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it. But this isn't helping. You think an apology is going to fix this? I asked, my voice shaking. No, she admitted. But I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to make this right. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind whistling through the trees. Finally, one of the other hikers cleared their throat. Look, guys, we're all tired, and this isn't the time or place for a fight. Can we at least get to the next campsite before we implode? I wanted to argue, but they were right. Fighting out here wouldn't solve anything. Fine, I muttered, grabbing my pack. Let's go. That night, as the group settled around the fire, I kept my distance. I could feel Sarah's eyes on me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. Eric, thankfully, stayed on the other side of the camp. Maybe he'd finally realized there wasn't a pep talk in the world that could fix this mess. As I stared into the flames, I realized one thing for certain: something had to change. Because I couldn't keep living like this. By the time we reached the base of the mountain, the air was sharper, colder, and somehow heavier. The snowstorm had cleared, but the sky was a dull gray, like even the weather was over our drama. We stumbled onto an old logging road, a thin thread of civilization in this frozen wilderness, and the group finally allowed themselves a moment of relief. We weren't safe yet, but at least the end was in sight. Looks like we're finally getting out of here, Eric said, scanning the path ahead. Great, I muttered. I'll throw you a party when we're not in mortal danger. Sarah shot me a look. Alex. Don't, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. Just, don't. We walked in strained silence for another hour, our steps crunching against the snow-packed road. The forest around us was quiet, too quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. And then it did. The collapse happened fast, too fast to react. The road ahead of us gave way in a thunderous roar, chunks of snow and ice crashing down into the ravine below. The group scrambled back, barely avoiding being swept over the edge. When the dust and snow finally settled, we were left staring at the gap in the road, a jagged, impassable chasm that stretched at least 20 feet across. Well, Eric said, his voice tight. That's not ideal. No kidding, someone muttered. Sarah turned to him, her face pale. What do we do now? He frowned, scanning the surrounding area. There's no way around it. We'll have to build something to get across. Build something? I repeated, incredulous. With what? Snow and bad ideas? Do you have a better suggestion, Alex? Eric shot back, his patience clearly wearing thin. I opened my mouth to respond, but Sarah stepped between us. Stop it, both of you. This isn't helping. The group worked in tense silence, gathering whatever debris we could find, fallen branches, pieces of broken logs, anything that might hold our weight. It was makeshift at best and suicidal at worst, but we didn't have much choice. As we pieced together a crude bridge, I caught Sarah glancing at me, her expression a mix of worry and guilt. I ignored her, focusing on tying knots that wouldn't collapse under us. Eric, of course, took charge, barking instructions like he was auditioning to be the next great survivalist. Careful with that end, he called. It needs to hold steady. I gritted my teeth. We get it, Eric. You're the expert. No need to remind us every 5 seconds. He shot me a withering look. Do you ever stop complaining? Do you ever stop talking? I fired back. Sarah groaned. Can we focus, please? By the time the bridge was ready, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the snow. Eric tested the first plank, his weight creaking against the makeshift structure. It'll hold, he said, stepping back. Will it? I muttered, eyeing the bridge skeptically. Sarah ignored me and turned to the group. Okay, let's take it slow. One at a time. The crossing was nerve-wracking. Each step felt like a gamble, the planks groaning ominously under our weight. I crossed last, my heart pounding as the bridge swayed beneath me. When I finally reached the other side, Sarah grabbed my arm. Are you okay? She asked softly. I pulled my arm free. Why do you care? She flinched, her face falling. Alex, Save it, I said, brushing past her. We're not doing this here. We found a clearing to set up camp for the night, but the mood was darker than ever. Everyone was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and the fire we built did little to warm the cold silence. Eric sat on one side of the camp, talking quietly with another hiker. Sarah sat on the other, stealing glances at me like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. I stayed near the edge of the clearing, staring out at the forest. Later that night, Sarah finally approached me. Alex, she said hesitantly. I didn't turn around. What do you want, Sarah? Can we talk? About what? I said, my voice flat. About how you lied to me? About how you and Eric. It wasn't like that, she interrupted, her voice trembling. I swear, Alex. Whatever you think happened, it's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. Then why don't you tell me what it was? Because from where I'm standing, it sure looks like betrayal. She sighed, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to shield against more than just the cold. Eric and we were a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. And I ended it before we even started this trip. Great, I said, turning to face her. So you're saying I got dragged into this mess for no reason? No, she said, her eyes filling with tears. You got dragged into it because I'm an idiot who didn't know how to let go of the past. Her voice broke, and for the first time, she looked small, fragile. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Alex. But I'm asking for it anyway. Because I love you. And I don't want to lose you. I stared at her, the anger and hurt swirling in my chest like a storm. Sarah, I said finally, my voice heavy with exhaustion. I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet. Her face crumpled, but she nodded, wiping her tears. I understand. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. But I did know one thing, this wasn't over. Not yet. The morning after our bridge-building fiasco, the group set off again, moving with the sluggish determination of people who had nothing left to give but couldn't afford to stop. The air was colder, the sky grayer, and the weight of unspoken words between Sarah and me felt heavier than the pack on my back. Eric, to my relief, had finally stopped trying to play leader. Maybe the icy dip knocked some humility into him, or maybe even he knew the limits of his charm. Either way, he stayed quiet, keeping to the middle of the group. Sarah walked ahead, glancing back every so often as if checking to see if I was still there. I avoided her gaze. By midday, the trees thinned, and we finally saw it, the faint outline of a ranger's station perched on a hill, smoke curling from its chimney. Civilization. The sight filled me with a mix of relief and dread. Relief because we were finally going to make it out alive. Dread because I knew that once we reached safety, there'd be no more excuses, no more distractions. Just the two of us, and the mess we'd made. The final stretch was grueling, a steep incline covered in patches of ice. By the time we reached the station, I was sweating despite the cold, my legs trembling with exhaustion. A ranger greeted us at the door, his face a mixture of surprise and concern. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, ushering us inside. The warmth of the fire was almost unbearable after days in the freezing cold. We sat around it, drinking water and eating stale granola bars while the ranger radioed for help. I barely tasted the food. My thoughts were elsewhere, spinning in a loop of anger, betrayal, and something I didn't want to admit, relief that it was over. After the group settled, Sarah found me sitting near the window, staring out at the snow-covered trees. "Alex," she said softly, sitting beside me. I didn't look at her. "What do you want, Sarah?" "To talk," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her eyes. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "What's left to say? You lied to me. You broke my trust. And now you want me to just, what? Pretend it never happened?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "I don't want you to pretend. I just want you to know the truth." I turned to face her, my expression hard. "Then tell me the whole truth." She took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap. "Eric and I, it was never serious. It was a mistake, Alex. One I regret more than anything. But it ended before this trip, and I swear, I never stopped loving you." "Then why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice rising. "Why hide it? Why let me find out like this?" "Because I was scared," she admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. "I thought if I told you, you'd leave me. And I couldn't lose you, Alex. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Her words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make her feel the same pain I'd been carrying. But instead, I said, "I don't know if I can forgive you." "I know," she whispered, wiping at her tears. "But I'm willing to fight for us. If you'll let me." The ride back to civilization was quiet. The group split up once we reached the nearest town, each of us heading in different directions, eager to leave the nightmare behind. Sarah and I stayed together, but the distance between us felt insurmountable. It wasn't until we were standing outside my apartment, our breath visible in the cold air, that I finally spoke. "I need time," I said, my voice steady but soft. "I need to figure out if I can trust you again." She nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'll wait, Alex. However long it takes, I'll wait." I didn't know if that was a promise she could keep, or if it was one I even wanted her to. But as I watched her walk away, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in days: hope. Because maybe, just maybe, some bridges are worth rebuilding. Subscribe to never miss a new story and discover even more captivating tales.